What's up? What's happening on a Wednesday? Hoffman Show, Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app, streaming live on YouTube, youtube.com/@theteam980. And we got a day that we thought would be fairly quiet that suddenly got very loud in the way that over the last 2 years it has typically gotten loud. Don Van Natta and Seth Wickersham wrote something. We will talk about it for a lot of the show today, but I will say up front two things. One, Don Van Natta is going to join us for the better part of the 5 o'clock hour coming up at 5 o'clock, starting Not My Beat segment, and he's just going to stick with us for like 2-3 segments and go through this story at length. So Don Van Natta, like you will not hear him anywhere else, 5 o'clock here on the Hoffman Show. The other thing I'll say is this, though. This is the first time one of these stories has dropped where it doesn't feel like the consequences will or should be in Washington. And I want to get into the substance of this story, and it's a story with nothing but villains, and there is a lot. We could do the whole 3 hours on the substance alone of this story. But we can do it with an emotional separation that says, this isn't an attack on the franchise you love anymore. It's an attack on the NFL, certainly the way I'm going to opine on it, because, God, they look bad in this. If for some reason you're an outsized John Gruden fan, then you might not like some of the stuff I'm going to say. But there was this natural defensiveness amongst Commanders, Washington football fans, when we would talk about these stories over the last couple of years because it felt like an attack on the team. And I don't know if I'm feeling this differently. Look, I'm a journalist, at least an opinion journalist. I have made no secret over the course of my career. Like, I didn't grow up here. This is not an irrational, emotional fan thing. Not that, like, for instance, the Junkies in the morning, like, that's their thing. They grew up here, and they should have that and bring that. There's value to that in this job. That's not the way I approach it because that's not who I am. It wouldn't be authentic. I come at this from a very journalistic lens. So hopefully I'm not misreading the situation, but I'm also a human being who's lived here for a long time, has a lot of emotional investment in the team because it, guides my day-to-day of my job in my life and has for the better part of, it's about to be 8 full years going on year 9, coming up here in August, the anniversary of my arrival in D.C. They rolled out no carpets, nothing. They did charge me full price of the toll on 267. But it doesn't feel the same in a good way. It feels like this is a continued reckoning about things that happened in the past and it without attacking the current team, so nobody needs to be defensive about it. I think we can all agree amongst rational folks that just because this team is being sold to Josh Harris doesn't mean that the things that allowed us to get to this point don't need to be rectified. And it's one thing if you want to say, well, Dan's selling, leave him alone, just like let him go on his yacht. I'm not going to sit here and defend Dan Snyder. I'm not going to sit here and say he should be let off the hook because he sold and he gets a bunch of money. That ain't going to be my take. But I at least understand the rationale there because you don't want to hear about him anymore. But when it comes to Goodell specifically and the NFL, we can't do business this way. And that is why this particular story, on a substantive level and on an emotional one, considering we are now 8 days from the sale being finalized, hits differently than the others. If you haven't gotten into any of the details yet, you've just kind of heard there's a story floating in ether. If you've been in like a skiff or something all day and you just got out, there was another ESPN story that dropped. It's significant. The substance of it is that Van Natta and Wickersham display the thread from the leaked John Gruden emails to Snyder's demise and how who leaked them could be any. There's a long list of suspects, all with their own motives. It shows the internal politics of the league. It shows the pettiness of many of the individuals involved. It shows immense amounts of selfish and otherwise bad behavior. It shows, I would say, in some levels, a gross incompetence. to the people in charge of the league, including Goodell himself. And there are no heroes here. There are no redeeming figures in the story at all. Depending on your motives, at some point while you read it, you find yourself, quote unquote, cheering for bad actors at certain points because it would help you achieve the thing that you want, whatever your version of justice is. Like, in a way, you're like, hey, yeah, go John Gruden. You throw those lawsuits in the Nevada court. But also, I'm glad your ass got fired because homophobic, racist, and otherwise misogynistic and terrible, bad behavior and language is not something that an NFL head coach should have in their repertoire. That's not a controversial statement. If you're a homophobe, especially of the Las Vegas Raiders, home of the first openly gay player in the NFL in Carl Nassib, if you're a racist in a league that's 70% black, if you're a misogynist in a league that has traditionally treated women not very well and should do better because as a society, I hate to break it to some of y'all, but we need to do a little bit better. Slash a lot better. Then you don't deserve the $10 million a year leadership position. It's pretty straightforward. But hey, if you're going to sue over getting fired from that, and that's going to open up another can of worms, and you're going to burn the mother bleeper down when it needs to be burned down in some of those same exact areas that I just talked about that you yourself got in trouble for, go John Gruden. It's a weird, weird story to process through those lenses of the heroes and the villains and the complex relationships at play. What I want to do next is kind of distill it down, less abstract, less macro, more micro. One, and most importantly, where we'll spend the most time next, is on Roger Goodell. How he got successfully blackmailed, according to the reporting, according to sources in the story, by Dan Snyder. How Snyder, the second person we'll look at, self-owned into selling the team. And third, I do want to circle back to Gruden and kind of where he is in all of this. That's next. We'll dive into the details on the Hoffman Show. Van Natta himself at 5. We're on the Team 980. We're on the free Odyssey app, and we're streaming live on YouTube. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Again, Don Van Natta will join us for most of the 5 o'clock hour here on the show. So if you have missed Van Natta, I know he was on earlier with Sheehan, Wickersham on with Danny across the hall this afternoon. So there's plenty of coverage of this story, but I can guarantee you that you will not find something more thorough than what you will get during our 5 o'clock hour today. Probably what will be close to 30 minutes with Van Natta. He's agreed to stay for most of the hour, so we are pretty pumped about that. Don going to join us coming up in just a little bit. I want to dive into the substance of this story, though, because there is a lot here. Again, it's through a different lens, considering where we are in the timeline of, investigations and the sale, with the sale just 8 days away from being completed. And no, in case anyone's wondering, this story will not remotely affect the sale. The agreement's in place, like everything's done. And frankly, like of all the ESPN stories, Snyder comes out of this one fairly unscathed. Like there's some bad Snyder stuff in here, but it's all stuff that we knew and could have guessed. And frankly, if I was in Dan's position, I can't say, no, I find it hard-pressed to see how I'd ever be in Dan's position in a million ways. But if you were, and you were negotiating punishment with your boss, you'd want to do some stuff that puts you in a position to get the lightest possible punishment, where you got to pick your own. Certainly. Whether you basically blackmail your boss to do it or not is a different question. I don't see myself doing that, in part because I'd be too scared to. But that's kind of actually where I want to start, with Goodell. Right? So Goodell comes out of this story, to me, looking the worst. I think this is a legitimate problem for him reputationally. I do not think it will be enough to affect his contract extension, which should be finalized as soon as next week, along with this sale. I do think there's going to be some issues for him with certain owners. Again, I don't think it's going to amount to a mass of owners, because most people just want to keep it moving. And if Goodell is willing to take bullets like he took for Snyder, for them in the future, that's someone that you want in the commissionership if you're the owner. And ultimately, if you're the owners, ultimately they're in charge. Is that how they should be thinking? Is, wow, when I get in trouble, this guy will fight for me. No, you should be thinking about how you don't get in trouble. But that's not typically how business works. And hey, if that's considered a perk, and by the way, Goodell's also good at generating revenue, probably going to be more than enough to save his job. But the damning details in here are that, according to sources, speaking to Van Natta and Wickersham, speaking to ESPN, there was a meeting after the Wilkinson investigation. And there had been this common interest agreement, which folks like Melanie Colbert and Megan Imbert and their lawyers, Katz and Banks, have been up in arms about. And my guess is they knew some of this or had heard some of this, and now reporters get it on the record, or into the record, if you will. Obviously, sources are anonymous because of the sensitivity of all this stuff. But they get it into the record about the details of just how deep that common interest agreement was and how it went down. And what went down is they have this meeting because they have to, and instead of defending Snyder, like you'd think a lawyer would do, lawyers from Reed Smith, a New York-based firm who is notoriously aggressive, and some would say underhanded and dirty, they have these emails from other league personnel that are really damaging. In the story, they say they're not homophobic, they're not misogynistic, they're not racist, but they are off-color, and the language is a bad look for the NFL, and that includes NFL legal counsel Jeff Pash. And some of these emails are between NFL folks, including Pash and Bruce Allen. And so Snyder's tactics there are essentially to blackmail the league into giving him what he wants. And what happens is, instead of going, you're not blackmailing us, and now you're actually in more trouble for trying, this is absurd, Goodell, who had, according to sources, been planning on lowering the hammer on Snyder, reversed course and said, actually, let's work with Dan. Let's see. And to the point that Snyder himself is weighing in on language in the press release. And if you remember when the $10 million fine and all that stuff got announced, there's this language about how Dan and Tanya had started to right the ship, and this stuff happened in the past. And, that was kind of the start of the narrative that Dan continued to give ultimately to Congress and anyone else that he leaked to, that this was all Bruce Allen's fault, and that he, the owner of the team, for many of the incidents discussed, even when before Allen's time, he, man who was directly accused later by multiple people later accused of sexual assault sexual misconduct by Tiffany Johnston, and it came out, had been previously accused of sexual assault in the 2009 incident on his plane. He was innocent. He was just, my hands were too far off. Now that they're on, we're going to steal it in the right place. And that started with an official league press release announcing the largest fine in league history. It made no sense. It made no sense. I remember I was part-time still at the time. I was doing overtime on the Fan, and I was on that night. And I just remember thinking, it was bad enough that you give the biggest fine in league history, the largest you're allowed to, but not bad enough that you'll tell us what happened. Not bad enough that he's not suspended more definitively. That it's this, you'll stay away, mealy-mouthed, not really suspension. And it turns out that's because that's exactly what Dan wanted. Some might say that's good lawyering. His lawyers got a better deal for their client. I look at it through the lens of Goodell and say, hey, man, if you're the commissioner of the league, you need to have a better backbone than that. You also need to have better lawyers than that. This is embarrassing. It's embarrassing. It's damning, and it is confirming in a lot of ways the worst fears of how dirty of a process this was for the folks that got hurt in the first place. And this is a question that, I'm hoping to have Lisa Banks or Deborah Katz on over the next couple of days to parse this out. But to me, this should open some legal loopholes or some legal holes potentially for the NFL, some legal liability, because Melanie and Megan and Tiffany and all these women that have spoken out, the former cheerleaders, the former employees, have said, we participated in this investigation because the NFL and Beth Wilkinson gave us their and her word that there would be a written report. And then all of a sudden the plug got pulled. Why? Well, it turns out that they got blackmailed, and that Snyder, the person that they were investigating, was the one who pulled the plug on the report coming out. And again, I'm not saying that through the lens of attacking Dan in this particular case. I mean, it's not great for him, but what do you expect? He's the beneficiary of low expectations. For Goodell in the NFL, how do you ever convincingly conduct an investigation again? How can you be trusted? And, what eventually comes out of this is the Gruden emails later get leaked. And there's a lot, obviously, in the ESPN story, and we'll get into a lot of this with Van Natta at 5 o'clock of who could have leaked them, why, all that kind of stuff. But that stuff leads to the congressional investigation directly. After the Gruden emails leak, Congress is like, all right, enough. You guys are a mess. We're going to do this. And that ultimately leads to the sequence of events that Dan sells the team. So it's hilarious, objectively funny, right? If we're going to take any humor out of this, any schadenfreude, any whatever, it's that Dan negotiating his own easy punishment, in part thanks to these Gruden emails, and then potentially being the person that leaks them for reasons that we'll have to get into later, launches the sequence of events that makes him sell the team. You know what it makes me think of, Anthony? Remember when we watched cartoons as a kid and the Wile E. Coyote Roadrunner?
Of course.
It makes me think of Dan is Wile E. Coyote, and there's a big old thing of TNT right behind him. And all he sees is the match in front of him, the fuse. And he thinks that fuse goes to John Gruden. He thinks that fuse goes anywhere other than himself. And he's like, ha, lights it, and he's just staring. And it just goes and goes out of sight. He's like, oh, where's the explosion? Where's the explosion? Where's the explosion? And sure enough, it loops around behind him and kaboom. That's what this feels like. That's what this feels like. Which in a way actually gets us to Gruden too. Because Gruden lost his job. But like in all of this, he's sitting there being like, they tried to blow me up. And it's like, why did they try to blow you up? Is it because you were critical of them? Maybe that's why Goodell wanted to. That's part of this story. But it's also because you were a terrible person too. Like, that's the thing that I think my like highest level takeaway in this is a story of 100% villains. Like, if you want your heroes, as I've said before, if you want to thank someone for the team being sold and all this getting to the point that it is, that this is, you know, we can look at this with more objectivity and less emotional investment in the team and how it might affect the team. And like, Ron Rivera's not going to have to answer questions about this. This is all completely irrelevant. I don't even think Josh Harris will answer, like 8 days from now or 9 days from now, whenever it is that Harris meets the press for the first time, which I'm sure he will. You think he's going to get asked about this? Like, he'll get asked vaguely about this. What does it mean to take over a team that's been through all this stuff, blah, blah, blah. And he'll probably be like, well, I don't really want to focus on that. Like, yeah, I'm just excited for the opportunity, yada, yada. But he's not going to get answered specific questions about anything in this story. And so it's, you know, so if you want your heroes, Melanie, Megan, Tiffany, on down the list. However, if you want villains, Goodell, check. Gruden, check. Snyder, check. Jeff Pash, check. Bruce Allen, check. Anybody in the story today, all villains, 100%. Let's dive into a little bit more of this story next. I didn't really get to say what I wanted about Gruden, so we'll get to that. I think we'll do, I don't know, Anthony, we'll have to make a call on Take Command or continuing our Best Player of the 21st Century series. So we can talk about what in the break, what we want to do at 45, or there'll still be meat on the bone to talk about this story. You might just go that. What I can guarantee is that Don Van Natta joins us coming up at 5 o'clock. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and always live on the free Odyssey app.
You can listen.
It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Don Van Natta will join us coming up at the top of the hour. Excited to talk to Don about this latest bombshell that he dropped. ESPN.com is where you can find it. He and Seth Wickersham collabing on it. So the Gruden emails, obviously lead to Snyder's demise, and that's kind of the overarching storyline here, and it's obviously very important here locally, and there's a lot of factors here in terms of how the league acted. And to me, I will say this real quickly before finally getting to the Gruden part of this. The thing I still don't understand is why Goodell, at every opportunity to get rid of an owner he should have wanted to get rid of, didn't. It has been my overwhelming question throughout this entire thing. Going back to the Washington Post stories in July of 2020. Like, if I was the commissioner of the NFL, every single day I would have showed up to work, especially since 2017, when the season ticket holder numbers just plummeted here in D.C. It's one thing when they were incompetent but still making money and the fans were still going and all that kind of stuff. Like, you could see the signs, but it's hard to do anything. When that season ticket holder number and like all the TV ratings and all that stuff started to just tank, which 2017 is when that happened, which is probably later than you would think, but numbers are what they are. I would have gone to work every day being like, I swear to God, if Dan Snyder messes up today, I'm going to send his ass to the moon. Like, we are going to get rid of that guy. Like, you got it. We can't have one of our marquee money-making franchises in the most powerful city in the country, if not the most powerful city in the world, be this bad. It's a legacy brand, and it's got that fan base, and he's murdering it. I swear to God, man, you slip up once, I will get everyone on the phone, and we will vote your butt out of here. That's why I would have approached it, from a purely cold business aspect. Nevertheless, the potential embarrassment, knowing the ways in which he was screwing it up. And yet at every turn, when given the opportunity, Goodell defended Snyder, sided with him, from moral missteps to corrupt business practices to a lack of organizational accountability, so that leads to kind of the toxic workplace and everything, to the financial stuff with the minority owners who were like, hey, you should look into this big bad red flag, and Goodell engineers Snyder wiggling out of that with full control of the team. It's just, I'll never understand that unless we learn something later which explains it. That is to me like the white whale of this story. What is the thing that ultimately I would like to know, and it remains most unresolved in my mind, is like, why the hell is Goodell standing for Snyder at every turn? Because it's not like he does this for every owner. He does it certainly in certain circumstances, and there are different rules very clearly in place that are different for players versus owners when it comes to personal conduct. But it's even laid out in the story. There's a disconnect between how Goodell and Snyder are working together versus the day before the emails are about to drop in the Wall Street Journal, Goodell calls Mark Davis and is like, hey, buddy, you should know about this. You should also do something. And they had the Gruden emails for months. Look, that's a different conversation of like, oh, you had them for months and you didn't do anything about them? You think you could at least tell the employer, and that way they know, and they could potentially do something about it? Months and months and months they had those emails, and they didn't do anything until it was about to become public. And Mark Davis is like, you think you could have told me? So there is a difference in how the owners get treated, and why did Snyder get such, I don't love this term, but like such excellent treatment? Maybe preferential is the right word. Maybe such preferential treatment. We'll never know. I'm not counting on it. I would love to. I'm hoping Don and Seth or someone else, figures it out, but that's my white whale of this story. The Gruden piece. This could be an entire show, different day, if we wanted to just be serious for 3 hours and talk about the intersection of sports, race, in America. And really the way marginalized groups get treated and talked about in America and how sports plays a role in that. Not always a bad role, by the way. I think sports can often play a leading role. The most classic and obvious example is the role Jackie Robinson played in integration. And even if we tell ourselves a much flowerier, whitewashed version of the Jackie Robinson story, that he broke the color barrier and that led to the civil rights movement, and now everything is great. Which is not remotely how that went down, as if Jackie Robinson didn't have to face immense amounts of hatred, directly, threats of physical violence, occasional actual physical violence, second-class citizenship when he was on the road with his teammates and couldn't stay in certain hotels, and all those things that as the NBA integrated and Bill Russell had to deal with in the 60s. Obviously, the Civil Rights Act of 1965 is incredibly important, and there's certain things that are accomplished, and it's a worthy celebration of our progress as a country and all that kind of stuff. And there were athletes like Jim Brown who played a role in helping shape the path for that, Muhammad Ali. We know it hasn't been linear. There can be growth and a desire for more. Both things can be true. But I think when we talk about Gruden and this story and you're reminded the content of these emails, it's a reminder of how still in 2011, 2012, when these emails are sent, and certainly still in many circles today, the homophobia, the misogyny, the racism is just so baked in that it is actually a potentially true statement that someone like John Gruden could say something so tremendously racist or homophobic and then be like, well, I don't hate gay people. I don't hate black people. How could you possibly say that? Look, Tommy Tuberville the other day, in one of the most mind-bending statements that's ever been uttered by a U.S. official into a microphone, this former football coach says that white nationalist isn't inherently racist, when that is literally the definition. You think white people are superior and you would like a nation full of white people. That's what white nationalism means. It's not my definition. It is the definition. It's Webster's. Take it up with him. Perhaps Merriam. They collaborate on the dictionary. And so you've got and then Tuberville comes out and says I'm a former football coach. I've dealt with more minorities than anybody in here. True quote from Senator from Alabama. And it just shows that, I'm sure plenty of black players went through Tommy Tuberville's Auburn program, and he treated them well, and they had favorable and may still have favorable feelings about him. Yeah, he was great to me. He helped my family, checked in on my mom. You can do all those things and still make one of the most asininely racist statements, or, I don't know what John Gruden and Carl Nassib's relationship was between coach and player, because Nassib had already come out by the time that Gruden was the coach of Vegas. He might have been the coach when he came out, and they might have had a great relationship. Doesn't change the things that Gruden said in those emails. And it's just kind of this atmosphere and culture in sports of unnecessary competition towards the most masculine, towards making sure that black players are just doing their jobs as players and don't step out of line. The minute you become more than just a player, that's a problem. Your job is to line up and play football. There's not a whole human being there. And what I think is important to take out of this, I'm not going to do a big lecture. I'm not going to do a big thing. I'm just positing some questions, from some food for thought for folks to think about, is taking the time to examine the biases that all of us have and say, are we seeing full people in people? Are we treating, these players as full humans? Are we okay with people in roles that we haven't seen them in before? Where do our biases come from? If they're societal and we grew up with them, you don't have to feel guilty about that. But when you recognize them, you should do something about it. And I think that's where I come away. So, like, Gruden apologized at the time, but then he still is playing the victim in this story in a way that makes me go, that apology was, you didn't really mean it. You're mad that you got caught, not willing to actually do the self-examination to make sure that you don't hurt people again, that the biases and the negative thoughts that you have get corrected because you know better. And that's the thing. Deep down, it's not like people who say these things don't know better. Sometimes that's why they say them, for the shock value. But the damage is real. And whether you mean it or not, or say something out of ignorance, in the end, doesn't matter. The example I've used before, and I will use again to wrap this up, is this. If you were to swing your hands wildly walking down a busy street, the person who you hit in the face doesn't care whether you walked up and punched them in the face on purpose or whether you were swinging your hands wildly and punched them in the face on accident. You still punched them in the face. Taking ownership of that, and if it was an accident, saying, hey, next time I'll be more careful, and I'm going to learn to not wildly swing my arms down a busy street so I don't hit people in the face because that's wrong and it causes them pain. That's the proper correction. Not just repeatedly walking down the street like you're doing the Bernie and continuing to smack people in the face. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Anthony, it's time to produce the radio show. What do we want to do next? We could pull a little bit of a Take Command mailbag. Honestly, I'm going to scrap that one. I'm going to push that one away. If you would like the rest of the Take Command mailbag that we did on the show earlier in the week, you can go listen to Take Command. It's the beauty of a podcast. It's available on demand whenever you want it. So we can squeeze some more juice out of different areas on this ESPN story. Or if you want to have a little bit of fun break, like a little amuse-bouche, if you will. It's not really an amuse-bouche. A little in-between palate cleanser course. We can do the best players of the 21st century in the NFC West. What do you think?
I think we need a palate cleanser. I think we go with the NFC West.
I think I agree with you. All right, coming up next, a little bit of a palate cleanser before we dive back into this story with Don Van Natta. We've been doing the best players of the 21st century for each of the divisions. NFC West is next. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Don Van Natta coming up in 11 minutes for Not My Beat, but he will stay with us for most of the 5 o'clock hour to talk about his new story with Seth Wickersham on John Gruden, the email leaks, and how that ultimately circled around to bring Dan Snyder down. Again, 8 days from now, we got a bunch of cool stuff that we're planning. We'll be announcing over the next couple of days in terms of the sale next week. So that's coming up on the 20th. But right now, we've been doing a series, Anthony, on the best players of the 21st century. It started with the Commanders, and Chris Sims gets credit for this. I think he was doing it on his show. We did the Commanders, and we were like, this is fun. Let's do the rest of the NFC East. And then we stumbled into doing it for the rest of the divisions. The NFC West is interesting because I actually only think there's one team that's hard. There's one team that's kind of hard, and then there's two teams that are absolutely no-brainers. I think we saved the no-brainers for the end.
Okay.
Do you agree with me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'm assuming that we're talking about all the same teams, but who knows? Maybe we'll find out that we didn't. Okay. The Seahawks, to me, are the hardest team. And it's hard because they have been good almost the entire time. The Seahawks' worst season in the 2000s, well, they had two bad ones, 08 and 09. They went 4-12 in Mike Holmgren's last year. Jim Moore's first year, they go 5-11. They go and hire Pete Carroll. He goes 7-9, and they've never been worse than that since. Like 7-10, technically, in 2021 is worse. But they have been good pretty much the entire decade. They lost 6 games in 2000. They won 6 games in 2000, 5 in 09, 4 in 08, and they've been at least a 7-win team ever since. They've won double-digit games 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 times. Must be nice.
Can't relate.
No.
Cannot relate to that.
No. So, the candidates are modern era, obviously Russell Wilson. He's a quarterback. He's the best one they've had. He was consistently excellent. Top 5 in the league, I think, for a nice chunk of that stretch. I think he was excellent. But I would not say, for me, he was better than Bobby Wagner. Wagner is probably the best middle linebacker in football, or at least top 2 for much of the decade. I think Earl Thomas was super elite. I don't know that he quite has the longevity. He doesn't have the longevity of Wagner, but was he better at his job, more unique than Wagner at his? I think you could make an argument. Cam Chancellor was obviously good. I think Thomas was better. Sherman was unbelievable, but I think Thomas was better. Other than that, you're looking at some of the early 2000s teams. Is there anybody? So I think a way I want to do this, I want to do a Pete Carroll era and a Mike Holmgren era and put them head to head. So who do you think should get the Carroll era nomination? Wilson, Wagner, Thomas?
It's so tough just because quarterback is the toughest position to play on the field. I'm going to go ahead and give Bobby Wagner the nod.
I feel like Marshawn should also get a shout out, but that's also so he doesn't burst in the room. Burst in the room with a packet of Skittles and throw it at us.
Yeah, I'm gonna go B Wags on this one. I do love Russ and what he did for Seattle, but I think B Wags' resume speaks for itself.
I agree. So there's a stat or a kind of a compilation stat on Pro Football Reference called approximate value, and in this stretch, starting in 2010's Carroll's first year, Hasselbeck was actually the leader there, but in kind of the good season, starting in 2012, Sherman was the guy the first 2 years. Then it was Wilson for 2. And then it went Wagner, Wilson, Wagner. I think Wagner's the guy. I'm going to go with Wagner.
Okay.
But I actually don't know if he's the correct answer for the decade because Shaun Alexander was maybe the best running back in football for a number of years. He certainly had like a 2 to 3 year stretch where he was one. Maybe he falls behind LaDainian Tomlinson and some other guys in that stretch. But Shaun Alexander was ridiculous in those Mike Holmgren years. 1,600-yard season, 1,800-yard season. Like, that dude, 1,400-yard season. That dude was out of control good. And, by the way, he had a Hall of Famer in Steve Hutchinson on the offensive line in front of him and another one in Walter Jones in front of him. So if you want to talk about best player of the 21st century, the competition in Seattle is maybe the stiffest in the entire league.
I mean, I would agree. But if we're comparing, if you're going to go, who are you going to go with from the Mike Holmgren era?
That's what I'm trying to decide. So Alexander had a 3-year stretch, 03 to 05, where he goes 1435, 1696, 1880. He's a Pro Bowler all 3 years. He's AP second team in 04. He's the MVP of the league in 05. MVP is hard to beat.
Mm-hmm.
But starting in 99, Walter Jones is a Pro Bowler almost every year until 2008. He's AP All-Pro 4 times, and he's in the Hall of Fame. And Steve Hutchinson, who's, by the way, his doesn't even go back into the 90s, from 2003 to 2009 is AP All-Pro 5 times. He's a second teamer twice, Pro Bowler every year. Yes, and by the way, he played 16 games every single one of those years from 03 to 09 and was still pretty good before and after.
Yeah, you're telling me all of those stats, but Bobby Wagner has an even more impressive resume. 8 Pro Bowls, 6-time All-Pro, and he finished top 5 in MVP voting as a middle linebacker. That's insane.
That is impressive.
That's insane. And he still has more work to do. Like, he's going to be on a good Seattle team this year. So
it's true.
He can build on, what he already has.
I say Wagner's the answer.
I'm going to be Wags too.
Okay. These other ones are going to be a lot faster.
Yep. You can go Cardinals?
Well, let's do the Niners because that's the only other one that there's a debate on.
Okay.
Best player of the Niners of the 21st century. I think it's Patrick Willis. He was the best middle linebacker in football for the period kind of before Wagner was. Had he continued his career, obviously, who knows? But he was Defensive Player of the Year as a rookie and AP First Team All-Pro as a rookie. He ultimately wound up being a 7-time Pro Bowler, First Team All-Pro 5 times, and he led the team to multiple deep playoff runs and was the best player on the best defense in the league multiple years running. I think it's Patrick Willis. I'm open to other potential guys. I think Kittle's going to have it say by the time it's all said and done. Trent's not going to be there long enough.
I got one for you.
Okay.
Frank Gore. And
he was really good.
I think his time in San Fran gets a little overshadowed just because he bounced around from team to team after he left the 49ers. But what he did for the first 10 years there was pretty impressive. He was very durable. So I would say him. I would put him alongside Tequil.
I would not.
I mean Patrick Willis.
Yeah. I would not because he never made a first team All-Pro.
Nah.
And while he did have some incredible years, an incredible consistency, almost 1,000-yard rusher every year for the first 12 years of his career, I think Willis is on another level.
Yeah.
So I think it's Patrick Willis. I actually don't think it's that hard. The other two are the easiest you can possibly have.
Yeah.
The Cardinals, it's Larry Fitzgerald.
Yes, sir.
And for the Rams, it's Aaron Donald.
Yes, sir.
Okay, we did it. That was easy. Tomorrow we'll do the AFC West. That was a nice little palate cleanser. Let's get back to the top story of the day, though. The new ESPN bombshell with the man who wrote it, Don Van Natta, joins us next. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. And there is another ESPN bombshell story out this morning about Dan Snyder and the downfall of him thanks to the emails that got leaked from John Gruden. Emails that went to Bruce Allen all the way back in 2011, came out in 2021. And we are going to spend much of not just this segment with the man who wrote it, but much of this hour with the man who wrote it. It is time for Not My Beat.
Today's top story from the perspective of someone who's there.
You are looking live.
This just in.
Not My Beat.
Bring in the man who broke the story, Don Van Natta, ESPN, back with us again. Don, you did it again. You and Seth, just more information, so damning for the NFL the way I read it. We're going to dive into as much as we possibly can. But where I actually want to start with you today is kind of the larger zoomed out process of how this works. In essence, this is a story about information gathering and information sharing and how the information goes from within inside a private group, the NFL and the owners and the Snyders, to the hands of reporters. And while this wasn't your story initially that you're reporting on the reporting, if you will, you have certainly done much of that information gathering yourself over your very illustrious career. So how does the gathering of information like this work, and some of the decision-making that goes into publishing a story like the Wall Street Journal did and like the New York Times did that is at the center of your story?
Well, the kind of work that Seth and I do is investigative reporting, and the kind of lifeblood of that is getting key people to trust us, to trust that we won't identify them, that we'll protect their anonymity if they want it protected, but also that we'll get the truth. And, people have lots of different motivations for speaking to someone like me. A lot of the reporting that's in this story are from sources that I've made over the course of my career at ESPN, which began in 2012. I've been doing NFL investigative type work since very early in my career at the network, and so has Seth. So we tap those sources. Now, the kind of story we did, though, is somewhat different from the stories that the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal did back in October 2021 on these leaks of these misogynistic, racist, homophobic emails that John Gruden sent to Bruce Allen. That was a single leak, or a leak of one email in the case of the Wall Street Journal, a leak of a batch of emails to the New York Times. And again, those reporters do very similar kinds of work that I do, in the sense that they also have relationships and they rely on them. But what we had to try to do, Seth and I, in this piece, and it was difficult, is we never asked those reporters who their sources were. We asked everybody else around those stories who could have been their sources, who likely were their sources, whether or not they're the ones that had the actual emails to leak to start with, and number two, the motive to leak them. And yeah, it's a tricky story because we're basically shadowing these two big scoops that led to John Gruden losing his job as head coach of the Raiders. And anytime you do that as a journalist, it's tricky terrain. And I hope readers will agree that we did a good job by bringing a lot of new information to the public's attention in this story.
Right. And no doubt there's a lot of new stuff. And really a lot of it is detail around kind of more generic things that at least subliminally we knew. But why did you think it was important to dive into who leaked these emails? Because there is kind of a little bit of a journalistic faux pas, right, that you just touched on, that these are people's sources. As a journalist, we don't want anyone ever sniffing around our sources. So why would we do it to someone else? Well, why did you ultimately make the call with Seth and your editors and the team at ESPN that it was important to find out where this information came from? Because there was more to that story in terms of where.
Well, there's two reasons for it, actually. The first one is we had sources tell us, and I think it's actually, you can't dispute this. It's not in dispute that the leaking of those emails against John Gruden that cost him his job, cost him his career, directly led to the congressional investigation that began against Dan Snyder and of the team and also of the NFL, and caused a lot of heartburn for the league office and for Roger Goodell personally. It all stemmed from these leaks. And that congressional investigation, as you know, Craig, led to Tiffany Johnston making her new allegations in February of 2022 before Congress in that roundtable session, which then led to the NFL hiring Mary Jo White, who is still preparing this report that we're all waiting for. It's been 16 months now. It also led to a criminal investigation that's ongoing in Virginia against Snyder and the team for financial improprieties. So the decision to leak them, and we believe Snyder was one of the people who did green light it, actually was a self-destructive act, because as our reporting shows in this story, as somebody very close to Snyder told us, he was free and clear in October of 2021. He was basically past the worst of the Beth Wilkinson investigation, with only a $10 million fine that the franchise had to pay, this sort of hazy suspension where the word suspension was never used. It was a slap on the wrist. And I'm sure we're going to talk about that process.
No doubt.
But that's one reason. But the other reason is we found through our reporting that there were others that were involved. And so that's intriguing, right? So if Snyder, as our sources said, one of the motives is that he was trying to ingratiate himself with Roger Goodell, the question is why? Then the question is, what's Roger Goodell's relationship to Gruden? How does Gruden view Goodell? DeMaurice Smith, the head of the NFLPA, the executive director of the National Football League Players Association, we have new information that he was potentially or allegedly involved in one of the leaks. So that's the other reason. And then finally, actually, now I think about it, there's a third reason. John Gruden is suing the National Football League,
right,
and Roger Goodell personally, and has actually won every court decision in Nevada at the district court level and at the appellate court level. Now it's before the Nevada Supreme Court. The NFL is trying to put this into arbitration behind closed doors. Gruden wants discovery. He wants it all out in the open. And so, this is a very big case facing the NFL that we know from talking to our sources among the owners and other league executives that they're very concerned about. So for all those reasons, we decided to take on the story.
Don Van Natta, ESPN, with us, of course, their senior investigative reporter. Latest story from he and his writing partner, Seth Wickersham, about the John Gruden emails and how that ultimately leads to the demise of Dan Snyder. I want to double click on something in there that you asserted here and that you guys assert in the story too. And obviously when you say it in the story, especially you're saying someone close to Snyder says that he was free and clear. And if there's not these leaks, he just keeps the team and things keep rolling. Do you believe that to be true? Because you and Seth obviously were starting to talk to people around the league. There's certainly others from the Post, the Times, et cetera, that were sniffing around. I tend to think that even if it would have taken longer, something else would have come out that would have triggered more problems for Dan. I don't know if it rises to the level of a congressional investigation and thus him ultimately kind of being forced to sell. But do you think that he would have gotten away with it, if you will? I feel like I'm in Scooby-Doo now. Oh, we would have gotten away with it if not for those rascally reporters. But do you feel like he would have gotten away with it had these leaks not come out, or it would just have landed in the same place through a different path?
Well, that's hard to answer. I can tell you that our sources, not just these people sort of close to Snyder, but people around the league, some of whom don't like Snyder. I mean, there's nobody left around the league among the owners who like Snyder. They all want him out. But even some of these owners say that if he had just kept his head down and just sort of dealt with this period of time where Goodell was not allowing him back to these league meetings around the country, was not allowing him to show his face on the field before games at FedEx Field and on the road, that he might have survived it. Now, look, he still had the issue of having to get a stadium. And as we reported last October and other people have reported, that's obviously a big problem that Snyder had, that, he has run out of goodwill. But remember that back in 2021, he still had a little bit of goodwill left. He ran out of that goodwill, Craig, if you really look back at it carefully, the history in 2022, after Congress started its investigation, after Tiffany Johnston and other witnesses emerged with these new allegations that Mary Jo White is investigating, that's really where things went south in Maryland, Virginia, was last year, as we reported in our story last October. So there is a very, very strong belief that if he was just patient and he just accepted what really turns out to be a very light punishment given to him by Roger Goodell, that he could have survived.
So that leads us to the punishment itself and kind of the substance of the story. Don's going to stick with us for most of the hour here. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're streaming live on YouTube, and we're always live on the free Odyssey app. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app, streaming live on YouTube, youtube.com/@theteam980. Don Van Natta from ESPN continues to stay with us now. And when we last left our villains, if you will, Don, we're talking about kind of the mechanisms of this story and how we wound up at this place today with you and Seth reporting. But I want to dive now into the substance, and that starts with the punishment for Dan Snyder and kind of the back and forth between he and Goodell to wind up at what they did. So how did Dan wind up with such a light punishment? And ultimately, what role did he himself play in deciding his own fate?
Dan played a major role in it. So we're reporting for the first time the behind the scenes arguments that were made at the league office in Manhattan on Park Avenue. This goes to June of 2021, shortly before the announcement is made of what Snyder's punishment is going to be. Dan Snyder's legal team, led by Joe Tacopina, the New York lawyer who is also, by the way, one of Donald Trump's defense lawyers, as well as a couple of lawyers from Reed Smith, go into the league office, and it's their job that day to basically defend Dan Snyder against the Beth Wilkinson allegations. Remember, Beth Wilkinson is the attorney that Snyder initially hired, that the NFL took over the investigation about the workplace, the toxic workplace culture allegations. And so instead of really making a full-throated defense for Snyder, actually the decision is made to put up on a PowerPoint, on slides, emails from league executives, including Jeff Pash, who's the general counsel of the National Football League. In these emails, Craig, they're writing off-color language. These are emails to Bruce Allen. I mean, they're not as bad as Gruden's emails. They're not racist and misogynistic, but they're close, and they're off-color. They're embarrassing if they get out. And the lawyers for the league that are watching this are stunned, because the message that Tacopina and the other lawyers are showing is, how dare you sit in judgment of Dan Snyder, you people here in the league office, because you've got these emails. You guys have the same issues that Dan has. And the implication was clear to the lawyers for the league that if they did not go easy on Dan Snyder with the punishment, if Roger Goodell lowered the boom on Snyder, that those emails would be leaked. So inside the league office, they actually called it the blackmail PowerPoint. And it turned out there were top people in the league office, we were told, that were so angry by these tactics by Tacopina and the other lawyers that they actually did want to hammer Snyder, and also for the findings of Beth Wilkinson. But Roger Goodell instead went the other way. And in the course of that punishment, we have sources telling us that Snyder basically dictated the terms of his punishment, even to the point of actually making word suggestions in the press release announcing the punishment. If you remember, Craig, there's language in there about how Dan and Tanya Snyder are righting the ship. The culture has changed. There's a lot of positive language in a press release that's supposed to be about the findings of Beth Wilkinson's investigation and about all of the allegations that Snyder was in charge of this toxic workplace culture, that the place was rife with sexual harassment and everything else. So we lay all of that out, which I know from, just some of the feedback and reaction I've had today, doesn't sit well, obviously, with the former cheerleaders and with the witnesses that bravely came forward with all these allegations, that the league went so easy on Snyder and almost was in cahoots with Snyder directly on what the terms of his punishment were going to be.
That is the part of the story that just left my jaw on the floor. The thing about blackmail is it's obviously if you can call it out before any of it gets out, and you never learn what the blackmail was, that's the most effective strategy. Often it winds up being, we're going to call it out and then we're going to get exposed and it's going to be bad, but hopefully people have pity on us because we got blackmailed. Rarely does it just work like this. At least it doesn't feel like in corporate America that this happens, or maybe it happens more and we never get this kind of reporting on it. But that's the part, Don, that is just amazing to me, is instead of calling out the blackmail and punishing Snyder for it, why does Goodell just give in and be like, well, you caught us. I guess we'll play your game now. And that's kind of, I guess, a theme. Like, we've talked about this every time you've been on. Like, why did they keep going with Dan? And I think this is also kind of a contrast that's laid out in the story versus kind of the blindsided nature to how Mark Davis felt in Las Vegas, where there's these emails exist in the league office for months. He finds out them the day before they're going to be published in the Wall Street Journal and ultimately has to fire his coach.
Yeah. You're getting to one of the biggest mysteries of this, is why it appears every single time Snyder is in a jam that he's helped out of it. He's literally lifted out of it by Roger Goodell. Why? I don't know the answer to it. I know that in our story last October, Seth Wickersham, Tisha Thompson, and I reported that Snyder was running around the league, telling some owners, telling other people that he had dirt on some owners, including Jerry Jones, who's a mentor of his, and on Roger Goodell, The implication, again, being blackmail. And remember, that was denied by Snyder in a full-throated defense that he sent to all the owners. Well, now it turns out, a few months later, we find out that there was a blackmail PowerPoint. Literally, that's the phrase that's used inside the league office, where emails were used and almost threatening. There's a threat to weaponize these emails against the league if they don't go easy on Snyder. Now, whether that's why Roger Goodell decided to go easy, I don't know the answer to that. He will not sit for an interview with me. I can tell you a lot of owners around the league speculate that might be part of it. Another possibility is Goodell is so old school. Snyder's one of his bosses, and he'll just do everything to side with him. Remember, he sided with Snyder against the 3 minority partners in that story I did back in February about those financial impropriety, allegations of financial improprieties. It's now being investigated by prosecutors in Virginia. The same thing. Goodell shut down any attempt by those limited partners to get to the truth about Snyder. He sided with Snyder there. He sided with Snyder on this particular issue, and I don't know what motivates it other than what we've reported in total in the last year in these stories.
Don Van Natta, ESPN, with us here on the Hoffman Show. So in so many ways, Don, what we're talking about feels very big and conspiratorial. There's another side of this story, though, in reporting and theorizing by some of your sources that makes it incredibly small and incredibly personal. And that is when you get to Goodell himself and his job security, and DeMaurice Smith and his job security, and the potential that either one of them may have leaked these emails from John Gruden for very personal reasons related to their respective jobs. Can you explain to the audience how that side of this story enters the equation?
Yeah, so let me start first with DeMaurice Smith before we get to Goodell. I think Goodell's a little bit more complicated than DeMaurice Smith. DeMaurice Smith, the week of the leaks, was basically facing a vote for his job. He had a tough year in 2021. There was a vote on the executive board of the union that was tied 7-7 about whether his contract should be extended. He had a vote on a Friday I think basically the second week of October, or maybe the second Friday in October, where the 32 player reps were going to get together and vote on whether to extend DeMaurice Smith a new contract. Well, that very day, earlier that day in the afternoon, just a few hours before that vote was taken on D. Smith's future, the Wall Street Journal published the story on the Gruden email using a racist trope to describe DeMaurice Smith, and it blew up. People were wondering all around the league who the source of that was. We have reporting now that D. Smith told a close associate of his, bragged that he was the one behind that leak. So that means, if true, and this is a source that we believe, we published it in this story, that D. Smith had a very selfish reason for leaking it or being involved in the leak, because possibly try to whip up some sympathy among the player reps. They did vote. He kept his job and was extended by a single vote. Now, I tried to speak to D. Smith. I should tell your audience for this story, he declined to talk with me through union spokesman, longtime union spokesman George Atala. So that's D. Smith. Roger Goodell is something entirely different, Craig. I mean, we do a lot in the story, as you know, about this very tortured relationship between Roger Goodell and John Gruden that goes back to the days when Gruden was in the broadcast booth for ESPN on Monday Night Football way back to 2011, where Goodell actually summoned Gruden to the league office to get a lesson on player safety because Goodell didn't like something that Gruden said in the broadcast booth on a Monday Night Football game. And so Goodell summons Gruden to the league office to get a lesson from John Madden and Jeff Fisher on player safety. This makes Gruden's head explode. He goes, there's no way I'm going to do that. He refuses, and he starts bad-mouthing Goodell around the league, saying all sorts of negative things about his leadership. And so we go into all of that, and a fair amount of that, we believe, got back to Goodell. So our sources, some of our sources told us that the motive Goodell would have had was an opportunity to get rid of a longtime antagonist in John Gruden. And there's some very salty language that Gruden has used about Goodell, even to this day, recently to associates, of how he thinks that Goodell blackballed him with these leaks and everything else. And so we lay that out. So yes, your question is a good one. There's personal reasons allegedly that both DeMaurice Smith and Roger Goodell would be responsible for the leaks.
And you lay out in the story as well, and I would encourage, obviously, anyone to read it. Also, I know you guys did a podcast episode of ESPN Daily, yourself and Jeremy Schaap, if you want to hear more on this part of it. But Snyder, going back to what we said earlier, like felt like, oh, maybe I can do a solid to Raj here and get back in his good graces.
We'll pick up with Don Van Natta next here on the Hoffman Show. The relationship between Goodell and Snyder, and why ultimately Goodell continues to defend a guy, or continued for years to defend a guy who, monetarily wise, made sense to kick out of the league. That's next with Don Van Natta as he continues with us here on the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and always live on the free Odyssey app. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Don Van Natta from ESPN continues to stay with us. A very extended version of Not My Beat today, but when you write a story like Don did, along with Seth Wickersham, detailing perhaps the biggest scandal in the NFL in a decade, you get multiple segments if you're willing to stick around. So, Don, continue to appreciate your time. So we've talked about Snyder to an extent. We've talked about Goodell a lot. We talked about Gruden to an extent. I want to circle back to him in a second. But there's actually another player here that we haven't talked about yet. And that player is Rock Nation. There's an executive there that plays a major role in this story. They are brought in by the NFL, but eventually get linked to the Snyders in covering some things around here and talking to folks around here. It was very clear they had the ear of the Snyders for the time that Dan and Tanya were still trying to do things. How does Rock Nation and specifically their top executive play a role in this story between the Gruden emails and how this eventually all blows up in Dan's face and the demise of Dan Snyder?
Well, I want to be really clear about this. So we have multiple sources who in real time, before the leak started and after the last leak happened back in October of 2021, who heard from people around Dan Snyder through a law firm named Reed Smith based in New York. Reed Smith not only represents Dan Snyder, they represent Rock Nation, Jay-Z's entertainment company, that Rock Nation and the CEO of Rock Nation, Desiree Perez, was somehow involved. Now, who is Desiree Perez? Well, she's somebody who sits on the board of directors of the Commanders, and she's also a consultant to the National Football League to help with social justice messaging, as well as helping the NFL put on its Super Bowl halftime shows. So Desiree Perez is very close to Dan and Tanya Snyder, and she's also very close to Roger Goodell. We lay out in the story, she has almost an open door policy to Goodell. Now, she refused to speak to me. I attempted to interview her for this story over a course of weeks. She declined all of those invitations. Again, I want your audience to know that a lawyer for her told a lawyer of ours at ESPN that she had nothing to do with these leaks. She adamantly denies even knowing anything about them. But we have multiple sources in legal circles as well as in the league office, including, by the way, Jeff Pash, the general counsel of the NFL, who believe that she was involved with Dan Snyder to get the ball rolling, to get these leaks started in early October. And Craig, I'm sure your listeners by now are like, well, throwing up their hands. Well, wait a minute. It sounds like everybody had a motive here. Maybe everybody was involved, right? It's like, and in a weird way, it's possible. It's possible that it started with Dan Snyder and his law firm with help from Desiree Perez and Rock Nation. It gets to Roger Goodell because these emails, these Gruden emails, land on Goodell's desk in early October on a Monday or Tuesday. 72 hours, one of them is in the Wall Street Journal. And then 72 hours after that, there's a whole bunch more in the New York Times. And Roger Goodell calls Mark Davis just a few hours after that Wall Street Journal leak and says more are coming. There's going to be more emails coming. How does he know that? So all of this we lay out. And look, this is all going to be litigated if it gets to discovery in the Gruden lawsuit. But we did the best we could, Seth and I, with the journalism tools we have to put as much of that information out as we could in this story.
Yeah, and I'll just tack on here so people understand the reporting process, having never been involved in something this size, but like smaller versions of doing investigative reporting. Certainly in my career, I did before I became a talking head who just spouts opinions every day from 4 to 7. But you know what? The way you get information is to have information. You can't just go to someone and be like, "Hey, you want to tell me all your deepest, darkest secrets?" Like, obviously, you develop the relationship over time because you prove being trustworthy and because you know things. And I think it is very possible, and this is completely me editorializing here, but I think it is very possible that someone got one email and went to someone else and was like, "Hey, I have this." And they're like, "Whoa, you should see what I have in my trove." And that starts to snowball. And so when you say, "Hey, it seems like everyone has a motive," I think it's possible that everyone's guilty, if you will, or whatever word you want to use there, that as the reporting process went, one thing led to opening, it serves as a key to unlock another door where you find another key, which unlocks another door. And all of a sudden we have this massive information that comes out through the Journal and through the Times.
Yeah, and I want to be clear. So there's a quote in our story, which I think is a really important one that's only gotten a little bit of attention, surprisingly, today. And that's from a legal source, a very close source that was sort of in the loop in the very early momentum behind leaking these emails, these Gruden emails. And that person said, from the perspective of Dan Snyder and the people around Dan Snyder, and whether Desiree Perez is part of that or not, really doesn't matter. Really, the way it was seen was these emails are given to Goodell. They provide Goodell with the opportunity and this is the language of the quote, to off Gruden, to get rid of Gruden, and to score points on a racial issue, which is something that, the league was looking to do after the blowback on the Colin Kaepernick situation. And by the way, that's part of Rock Nation's agreement with the NFL on consulting, is to help on those very issues. And the way this source put it was, this was a gift. In other words, a gift from Snyder, at least from the Snyder camp's perspective, to Goodell, so Goodell could knock out a longtime antagonist named John Gruden and do the right thing in the eyes of fans.
It's very like early 20th century Russia. Like, here is the head of your enemy on a platter.
Yes,
it's like,
it is.
You didn't have to kill a guy. What are we doing? Don Van Natta with us just for another minute or two here on the Team 980. I want to wrap with this, Don. Not Goodell related, not Snyder related. What about Gruden's role in all this? Because none of this happens to John specifically if he doesn't send the emails with the racist language and the misogynistic stuff. And while I understand why he would feel blindsided by these things coming out a decade later, and why I understand even more so Mark Davis's frustration to be like, wait, you guys knew about this all along and you never thought to share it? Like, what the hell? It doesn't feel like Gruden has ever taken ownership for the actual substance, which is very important here. Like, the reason the NFL has an issue around racial and misogynistic and anti-gay issues is because there are people working in the league who use even, you can say whatever about their motives, but they use this language, which is incredibly harming and damaging to real people. And so whether you want to look at it through a business lens of alienating, marginalized groups, or a human one of, hey, we don't talk about people this way because it's bad and it is immoral. And that's not like some incredibly high moral standard that I'm putting on other people here. Like, Gruden doesn't seem to actually take accountability for the substance. Am I missing something here, that he has done that in another place? Or does he just or does he kind of have 2 points where legally, yes, he does have repercussions that he is entitled to, but also substantively he can still be wrong?
Well, that's a great question. He apologized at the time. He said these emails were not representative of who he was. They were private emails. They had been a decade earlier. And it's not the way he talks. It's not who he is. So he did put out this apology, but it had the feel of being a little bit perfunctory, right? And Craig, you're right. Now he's going for broke. We have language in our story. People close to him told me that he's not going to settle for any dollar amount. He wants the truth. He's going to burn the house down, is the language that he's apparently used with people around him to get to the truth of who did this. He's convinced it was Goodell. He is absolutely convinced that it was Goodell who did the kill shot, as he puts it, to his career. And when it comes to that language, there hasn't been that much remorse shown on his part. And now maybe that'll happen if it ever gets into a courtroom in Nevada before a judge or a jury. But you're right. It's an excellent question. He feels he was given no due process, and he said that in a statement that was given to us for this story, that he was completely blindsided by it, as was Mark Davis. One of the things that really bothers the Las Vegas Raiders owner, Mark Davis, the most is he believes he doesn't just believe it. He knows, because he was told, we were told, that other owners, including Snyder, knew about these emails, obviously, in the summer of 2021. And Davis didn't find out about it until the day before the Wall Street Journal reported. He's sort of like, what's that about? This involves my head coach. If they had quietly told me about it a few months ago, we could have dealt with this. Now, maybe dealt with it behind closed doors, which is the way a lot of things in the NFL occur. But right. he felt sandbagged, and he felt that wasn't right either. But yeah, it's an excellent point about Gruden. The language he used, the racist, misogynistic, homophobic language, was awful. There's no place for that. You could argue certainly he was justified, Roger Goodell, in saying to Mark Davis, you have to do something about this. And it only got worse after that New York Times story with even more of it. And we haven't heard that much apologies and language of remorse from Gruden since then.
Don Van Natta did it again. You can read the full story, ESPN.com, he and Seth Wickersham. I will say, Don, this one did feel a little bit different for the first time. It's like, okay, well, Harrison will be here next week, and this one felt like a lot more about the league, which is an interesting perspective, I think, for us here in Washington, but still incredibly important reporting, and certainly the league is going to have a lot to answer for based on it. So thanks again for your time, as always.
Thank you, Craig. Appreciate it.
It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app, streaming live on YouTube, youtube.com/@theteam980. Again, appreciate Don Van Natta spending time on a busy day. He does a lot of interviews when they drop these stories, and he always is gracious in taking the time to spend some extra time with this show, which I think is because he likes my questions, which is nice. I appreciate that. I try to do a good job, but he could still be like, yeah, man, like, let's get on with it. 10 minutes, let's get out of here. And just spend a long time with us. So if you want the full interview, if you missed any part of it, joined us late, it's up on my YouTube page, youtube.com/@CraigHoffman. Of course, you can also rewind in the YouTube stream on the Team 980. You can rewind as well in the Odyssey app, or just keep listening to us live. Like if you're in the car right now, obviously you can't really rewind on your car radio. Oh, some car radios you can, I think. I don't really know how that works. I think it depends on how fancy your radio is. I do think that's a thing. Anyway, there's always the podcast. So you got no excuse if you want to check it out. There's plenty of places. So do that. And I'm gonna bring you in here. Not yet, apparently. I'm gonna turn that down, and then I'm gonna bring you in. You've now listened to Don, and I don't know how much of the story you read, but I've said my piece. Like when you look at it from your seat, which I realize that you typically consume these things much more as a fan than as a radio, but you're like, oh, Craig's gonna talk a lot about this today. That's the extent of your radio responsibilities with a story like this.
Pretty much.
But like, am I right that it feels different this time? That like there's not this urgency, desperation, everything's on fire feeling that has come with some of these other stories, and it's kind of like, okay, now we'll figure it out. It's like if this story broke about the Cowboys or the Vikings, or maybe the Cowboys is a bad example because then there'd be a parade. But like, the Vikings or another team that's not your team, because in a lot of ways, like it's almost a BC AD type of thing with the sale coming next week.
Yeah, I think that's more so what it is. It's more so the sale is literally, about a week away, and we don't have to necessarily deal with this anymore. I think it's more so, as a fan anyway, I'm looking more towards the future. Yes, I'm glad all of this stuff about Dan has come out. Yes, I'm glad, it's forced him to, have to sell the franchise. And it's not just, about selling the franchise. Also, from a moral, ground and things of that nature, it's just pointing out how bad the NFL and, people that have power, how it can make them look and seem sometimes. So I think now that it's all being brought to the forefront, I think it's just good to, have everything out. We know, who the type who these people are, and now that, all of this is out there, it's more so just looking forward to the future. So I'm just glad I can finally put all this stuff behind me again. When the stuff comes out about Dan, I don't look forward to, talking about it so much, just because I just feel like I'm repeating myself, and I don't have to do that anymore. And I'm just glad, and I'm a little optimistic for the future, man.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're a fan, like, you shouldn't have to feel defensive. Not that you ever should have. That's the other thing too, is like, I know a lot of people could separate art from artists, and that's fine. People have been doing that in different things for years. There's certain art and artists that I'm like, I can't do it. They're just like, I can't listen to certain musicians because I'm just like, nah, I knew too much about you. Like, we don't. And I've told you, there's certain musicians we don't play on the show. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm never gonna go out and be like, hey, welcome to the show. We don't play, artist X here because he's whatever. Like, I'm not gonna go out of my way to beat them up, but I'm not gonna play their music because it's like they don't deserve that. Which sucks because some of the music itself is great, right? And by the same token, some people could say, I don't really care who owns the team, especially older fans, I think. Like, I respect the fact that a lot of you listening were here before Dan Snyder, will stay here after Dan Snyder, and you didn't care that, you cared because he ruined your team, not because of all this other stuff, because you're just out there rooting for the team. And I totally get that. But I also think there's a lot of people, and look, the data suggests this as well, as the fan base has continued to diminish, and especially the way you sustain a fan base over time is like you eventually have to bring in younger fans. Because, the 55-year-old guy driving down the Beltway right now, yeah, you, John, talking, Mark, Bill, talking to you. Like, you became a fan when you were 25 or 15 or 5. So if the 5, 15, or 25-year-old now doesn't become a fan, they're not going to be a fan in 30 years. And so and if they don't want to root for a team that has a crappy owner, because that's the thing that's most associated with the team, I get it. That's how I would be. There's no way if I was looking for an NFL team, or if I had a kid that was looking for an NFL team, I'd be like, you should root for, over the past couple of years. Now it's different. But Washington. But like, let's say in 7, 8 years, I got a kid who's starting to get into sports, and we're still living here, and he wants to root for the Commanders, assuming Josh Harris is runs the thing the same way he has the Sixers, and I don't think I'm setting my kid up for a lifetime of heartbreak and rooting for a bad person to own the team. Then I'm like, yeah, root for the left hand up, kid. Like, that's fine. And so I appreciate that from the fan perspective. I still think it's important to talk. Like, let's be frank. Like, it's the middle of July. There's only so much to talk about. A major NFL story, if this was about, again, the Vikings, the Bears, whoever, we'd be talking about this today because of how bad it is for Goodell. But in many ways, I feel like the difference in today and a lot of the other stuff was like, this is an NFL Goodell story that features Snyder versus when we've done these things in the past and Snyder and his role was the central focus and figure. And part of that is because the people with power in this dynamic has changed, and part of that is because the details of this particular set of anecdotes is really about Roger Goodell, not about Dan Snyder. So there's that. When we get back here on the Hoffman Show, it'll be 6 o'clock. Today's Wednesday, and that means it's time for Never Read the Comments here on the Team 980, live on YouTube, and always streaming live on the free Odyssey app. It's the Hoffman Show, final hour on a Wednesday. Team 980 always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Anthony, I have done a terrible job at something today. Wow, I just realized I cannot believe I have not done this all show. I gotta let the audience know what we're doing tomorrow.
Ooh. Did you do it yesterday? No.
I think I did at the end of the show.
It was brief.
I should have been hammering this all show long. Damn it. All right. Tomorrow. This is very exciting. I should fix my posture. Should straighten up. Let the folks know. Tomorrow, on this here radio station, on this here radio show, we will talk to one of the most significant players on the Washington Wizards, a man who many of you wrote off, most of you are unsure of, a few of you confident in, but someone you deserve to hear from. Tomorrow, on this show, we will talk to last year's first-round pick, Johnny Davis. And I'm pretty freaking excited about it. He obviously had a really rough year last year. I think by now people know that a lot of that was like outside circumstances in some ways. Some of it's just being 20 and trying to adjust to the NBA in the middle of kind of a weird locker room for a 20-year-old to walk into. He had his first kid last August, and that obviously changes your life tremendously. He was hurt, which did not help him get off the ground in any meaningful way that screamed success. And then he got buried on the bench and in the G League, and he just kept plugging. And I'm excited to talk to him about how he's gotten to where he is now, where he looks like a second-year player, not a dominant star second-year player, but like he looks like a second-year player in the summer league, where he just figures out how to score. He's really good defensively, and I'm excited to continue to watch him grow. And I'm excited to talk to him on the show. So tomorrow, do we want to set a time? We're going to tape that before the show. So Anthony, what time do we want to air that tomorrow? Do we have thoughts on that? 4:30, 5:30?
Probably 4:30.
4:30? All right. 4:30 tomorrow. Your boy, Johnny Davis, here on the radio show. If that's a time where you're still working, you're not going to be able to make it, Rewind app. We'll put it on YouTube, be in the podcast feed. You're not going to want to miss it. So that's tomorrow. Anything else coming up this week that we should let people know? Yates will be here on Friday. We'll see. We talked about doing an entire segment on him making fish salads or something like that. We probably won't do that. But we'll talk sports with Yates on Friday. Anything else that we got on the docket?
Probably the ESPYs a little bit tomorrow.
Yeah, we'll probably talk a little bit about it. Take Command was awesome today. We taped it this morning. It'll be out first thing in the morning. Jordan Rodriguez, host of The Athletic's new series, The Play Callers, which is about Kyle and Sean and Mike McDaniel and Matt LaFleur. The series is bleeping incredible. Like, Anthony, have you listened to it yet?
I have not.
You need to, man. You will enjoy the hell out of it. You're a football fan, and especially if you're a Washington fan. Like, there's the first episode, you're just gonna get to a point where you want to throw your phone. You know, if you live like an apartment building in D.C., you're gonna want to go to the roof and throw your phone off of it, because they talk about some of the demise of the egos and how everything deteriorated in 2012 and 2013. But like, if you care about the NFL and how offense is, and even if you want to know more backstory about all that stuff, you got to listen to the series and then listen to our chat with Jordan. She was awesome. And it was very cool because she's done a lot of interviews around this series, but this one was wholly unique. I mean, Jordan's a friend. I've known Jordan for 7-8 years at this point, since she was back at the Charlotte Observer before she ever went to The Athletic and started covering the Rams and getting to do these larger enterprise projects. And, you know, we were talking about it before and after, and she was almost nervous for the interview, but she was so excited because Logan could have been featured in this piece. Like, it would have been a probably an odd choice because Logan is not nationally known. But, like, Logan played for every single one of these coaches and played for Kyle and multiple stops in his career, and would have been an interesting perspective. So we were lucky on our show, because Logan co-hosts it, to get to talk about that. And so the conversation between me, who covered Sean, and obviously has studied a lot of this stuff, Jordan, who covers Sean now and did a year's work on this piece, and Logan, who lived it, was really fascinating. So we'll play some of that, if not a heavy chunk of that, for you on the show tomorrow. But I would just, there's so much in there. Listen, even if you listen twice, listen on the podcast, listen on the radio. Cannot recommend that enough. So Take Command, definitely check that out. If you're not subscribed, it's almost football season. What are you doing? Go ahead and subscribe. Take Command wherever it is that you listen to your podcast. However, right now, Sir Anthony Haney, he who has been knighted by me right now to be Sir Anthony Haney. It's just after 6 o'clock on a Wednesday. There's a thing we do at 6 o'clock on Wednesdays. It's when we throw caution to the wind. We decide all those people that tell us to be careful on the internet, they're wrong, at least for about 15 minutes. Post, say what you want. Don't get too caught up in the comments. In fact, you're better off just not reading the comments. And yet, what do we do each and every week here on the Hoffman Show?
We read those comments, baby.
Yeah, we do. And then Anthony has a giant grin when he gets to do that bit every single week as if it's the most fun he has all week. And I thoroughly enjoy it. Let's dive in to the comments. First of all, I need to get the Kevin Hart. First of all, and we need to put that on the board. I need to get the board back. My soundboard has been down for like a week now.
Yeah.
Note to self, talk to engineer Tom. He'll fix it in 5 seconds. Can't fix it if I don't tell him. Anyway, first of all, I did some accents at the tail end of Take Command on Monday, and I would just like to thank all of the commenters on 106.7 The Fan's YouTube page who against Logan's wishes, encouraged me to continue to do them. So I would just like to say to you, Logan Paulson, I will continue to do the accents. Why? Because I'll do them for the people. You can leave comments that I can respond to in a much more mature manner. In fact, sometimes even in depth. On 106.7 The Fans page where we post full episodes of Take Command. Of course, my page, at Craig Hoffman, where we get most of the comments for this segment. And at the Team 980, where we also post a bunch of content for the show and stream live daily from 4 to 7. You can also leave a comment live during Never Leave the Comments, 6 o'clock every Wednesday in the chat on the Team 980's page. Let us dive in, Anthony Haney, to a video that we did last week, a segment we did actually earlier in the week. Do the Commanders have a bottom 10 roster in the NFL? First of all, people were mad at us like we were saying that they did. ESPN did some rankings. We reacted to them, and I had to tell a couple people, hey, it helps if you listen with the sound on as opposed to just responding to the question in the title. We did not think they did, but it certainly got folks riled up. This one I thought was an interesting thought process, but also a bit silly. But GBRV8IM said, take away all the quarterbacks, how would the rosters rank? And I'm like, take away the quarterbacks, it's the most important position on the team. But if you're trying to evaluate the roster as a whole, I mean, it is an interesting exercise because, you know, like the Chiefs have an exceptional roster. Well, what if it's not with Patrick Mahomes elevating Travis Kelce and the rest of their wide receivers and their O-line? Sure, Kelce would still be awesome. Chris Jones would be incredible. They've got some solid depth on the defensive side. But how would you look at that offense? You'd look at it as middling as opposed to the best in the league or one of the 5 best in the league, one of the 3 best in the league, wherever you want to draw the line. So it is an interesting exercise. And I do think the Commanders, by the way, would rank a lot higher if people weren't so concerned about their quarterback. Unfortunately, when they take the field in the fall, I do think they're going to have a quarterback out there, and how he plays is going to affect things. So a bit silly on that front. But an interesting thought exercise. David Byler says, the problems for us are the O-line and the quarterback. Both could be better than last year, but that's not saying much. Again, I think the scheme is going to elevate both of those positions, so that's going to be very helpful for those two units. Matt Law 9302 says, I agree that we are woefully underappreciated when it comes to our overall roster. the Commanders and all DC teams, but especially the Commanders, never live up to any preseason hype. I personally think it's best for us to be slept on nationally and allow that slight to form unity within the locker room. I believe a playoff run is possible this season. I would actually love to ask, like, someone like Z. Oh, Z's coming on the show soon, right?
Z said he's willing and able whenever.
Let's Z, for those that don't know, Anthony's best friend is Zaire Franklin from the Colts, a fellow fine Syracuse Orange. Let's plan on Zaire next week.
All right, that's a bet.
Monday or Tuesday. Monday or Tuesday next week. Zaire Franklin on the show. Zaire doesn't know that yet, but he's already said yes. But I'd love to ask Z this question. I'd love to ask Logan this question. And I'd love to ask, like, Santana, Smoot, like, different guys, because I think Logan would be like, I don't care. But Logan's an alien when it comes to football players and his approach to the game. Like, he was maniacal in his details, and he was completely self-motivated. He had himself convinced that if he didn't have the best practice every practice, he was going to get cut. And there were stages of his career where that was closer to being right than the average NFL player. Like, he was a fringe guy for a lot of his career. But someone like Zaire, who's a bona fide starter, like, how much do outside expectations actually serve as motivation? And how much of it is like, I don't care what they ranked us. Like, we got to go play football. But motivation, we know, matters. Like, it can focus you. So I'd be curious to ask that. Write that down on the questions for Z next week. Doc Black 59 says, let these clowns look down on us, because if we manage to be great, we can tell these guys to stay in their lane and keep that same energy they have now. See, to me, like, that kind of embodies it. It's much more a fan thing. Fans love to chirp. But, like, most players, if we're being honest, and Zaire's talked about this last time he was on the show with us, actually. Like, most players don't give a rip what the media says because they think we're all idiots anyway. It's a lot of, like, you hadn't played, like, you don't know. I think that's overstated. I think there's a lot of us in the media that do know what we're talking about. And our objectivity of not being there in the moment, as long as we have some prerequisite amount of knowledge, helps us actually be better analysts than a lot of players in the moment, because they have biases based off personal experience. If Zaire goes up against a quarterback, sorry, now I'm picking on Zaire, but if Z goes up against a quarterback who has a terrible day, he's going to inherently think that quarterback is worse than he is if he's awesome the other 16 weeks of the season. It's like, I don't know, that guy's not that good. Like, I played him. It's like, yeah, he had his worst game of the season. He just had a bad day. He woke up on the wrong side of the bed. Things happen. He's human. So there's, like, that personal bias. And look, we have that on some level as analysts as well. If, we watch them against our team, whether our team is as a fan or the team that we cover, that's going to impact that. But it's different when you're out there. So I think it's great to get the different perspectives, and that's why I think most players don't care, but fans do. Fans love the underdog stuff. Fans love to chirp, and that stuff does definitely trickle down to the players at some point. Lot of can't wait to prove it wrong. Can't wait to prove it wrong. Joe Thomas or Joe Thompson 8622 says coach is a big thing too, and Ron is ranked pretty low. See, I actually don't think ESPN put coaches in this, but it's worth, and by the way, head coach matters so little, and it's something that we've actually talked about quite a bit on the podcast on Take Command, is like the coordinators shape your team far more than the head coach does. The head coach shapes it because they hire the coordinators, and it depends on the team. Like, McVay is the offensive coordinator. Kyle Shanahan is the offensive coordinator. Kevin in Minnesota, LaFleur in Green Bay. Like, of course, if they are the OC, then the head coach matters a lot. But, like, it's because they're the OC, not necessarily because they're the head coach. But it shapes how your team is taught. It shapes what your team runs. It shapes how your team performs. And there's kind of a general oversight and attitude that your head coach puts on. But if you're like, we're going to go out there and crush them, yeah, super motivated, and your scheme stinks, like, there's only so much you can do to overcome a bad game plan if the other team has a good one and, by the way, is relatively equally motivated. So Ron being ranked high or low, I don't think really matters that much. I do think Bieniemy being here and Del Rio, who's good at his job, should help elevate the roster more than anything else. All right, some basketball. talked earlier in the week about how Johnny Davis and Bilal Coulibaly have had a strong start to Summer League. Of course, again, if you missed it earlier, Johnny's going to join us tomorrow on the show. But a couple of thoughts there, starting with Ant Alpha, who makes a really interesting comparison, especially for this show. Ant, you ready for this one?
Yep.
All right. I know casual fans won't like this comparison, but strictly on the court skill set, I believe JD could be for us what Dylan Brooks was for Memphis. Obviously, Memphis was ready to move on from Brooks, which appeared to be for reasons outside of basketball. But he was a guy who could typically guard the opposing team's best perimeter player while not being a complete liability on the offensive side of the court. And he ended up being rewarded by making his first ever defensive team last year. I can't stand Dylan Brooks. I really like Johnny Davis. I think that's an awesome comparison. The reasons I don't like Dylan Brooks is because he writes checks his mouth can't cash. Or he writes checks with his mouth that his keister can't cash, if you will. But as a player, like, especially before this year when he completely fell apart in the playoffs, like, he could create a shot every once in a while, especially as like a fourth option. He got to the point that he could reliably enough knock down open catch and shoot threes. And he was a really good defensive player for a long time until he completely lost confidence and LeBron James snatched his soul. So if Johnny Davis turns into that, like, I think that's a good thing. I mean, it's an $80 million player according to the open market. It's what he should sign for in Houston.
Yeah, I mean, I love that idea as well, but what does that leave Denny Avdia then? Because that's supposed to be his
Denny
role.
to be better than that. Like, Denny's got to be someone who can create shots. Like, I also don't think I think Denny's going to be better offensively and worse defensively. That would be my guess. It's like Denny is a very solid defender, but not first team all defense type of guy. I think Johnny has that potential. And I think Denny is more of a shot creator, not just for himself, but especially for others, where you can play a little point forward and run some offense through him. That's the best version of Denny Avdia. I don't think Johnny's ever any kind of remote primary offensive option.
Yeah, I mean, we got a lot to figure out this season. So
multiple seasons. It's not just
Exactly.
this year. We'll see how many of these guys are even here a year from now.
Exactly.
There's some other good ones on this, but I actually really like that comparison, which I didn't think I would. But then I thought about it for 5 seconds. I was like, no, that's correct. A little back and forth in the comments. We love this. I had said I think Davis could eventually grow into, like, the best version of him is like a first team all defense, 18 points a game type of guy. So if he's right below that defensively and is a 14 point per game type of guy, like, that seems like that's a useful player to have. And MJ says, I'd be happy with 10 points with decent efficiency from Davis, let alone 18. And then Ant Alpha, same guy, comes back and says, JD had an extremely rough rookie season, but once he got meaningful minutes his last 14 games, he averaged 10.5 points per game on 40% shooting from the field. But you don't think that he can improve on those numbers as he continues to work on his game? Sheesh. Tough crowd. And then MJ responds and says, because I have seen young guys who put up fool's gold at the end of the season countless times, we were literally tanking. Why would other teams take us seriously? And under 40% shooting, under 30% three is terrible. I actually think both people are right here. 40-30 splits is not exactly something to brag about, but he did find ways to figure it out. He just didn't have reps. Like, last year he was in the G League for most of the year. And by the way, he got way better in the G League. So I tend to think when Davis gets more reps at the NBA level, he's going to get better. How much better? I don't think he's going to be an all-star. That would be a hell of a leap. But in 2 years after he's played 150 games, as opposed to 14 or 20 or whatever he played last year, like, I don't think it's unreasonable for him to be pushing, be above 50% from the field and be pushing mid-30s from three on a fairly low volume of shots. But I think those numbers are perfectly reasonable. And judging him based off of what is almost the beginning of his rookie season at the end of his rookie season because he had so little experience, I think that's the one thing I think is wrong in all this. The last topic that we'll hit here and never read the comments. Again, you can always leave your comments at Craig Hoffman on YouTube, at the Team 980, at 1067 The Fan. Who is the best Commanders player of the 21st century? I've been talking about this with some friends over the last couple of days as well. And it's been really interesting, the discussion back and forth. So, first of all, Char Mercy says, quarterback, the best was Alex Smith. You are wrong. And you're laughably wrong. Alex played like 6 games. He was mostly bad, and then the injury. That's not Alex's fault. He did win. He was 6-2 at the time of the injury. And he came back, obviously, in 2020 and helped them win a division. But Kirk Cousins was a significantly better quarterback. Sadly, the best quarterback of the last 25 years. I will not tolerate the slander because it's you lying to yourself, and you don't need to do that to yourself. Be kinder to yourself. Tell yourself the truth. Wheezy Red says Sean Taylor and Clinton Portis. Lee Rubenstein says Sean Taylor and it's not close. I've come back around a little bit on the idea that Sean Taylor could be the answer to this question. But I do think that people are overrating him a little bit because of like the projection they're making on what he was going to be. When Sean died, when he was killed, he was probably the best safety in football. He was one of the best defensive players in football. And he had gotten to that point over the course of time, and one could assume pretty safely that he would have continued to do that he would have been an all-pro multiple times over, that he would have potentially revolutionized the position because there just weren't dudes who were that big and that fast. And, who knows what they would have continued to evolve with him. There was a comment on one of the YouTube videos on the fans page when we were talking about some other stuff, and someone said, Sean, what if Sean Taylor could have played the Buffalo nickel? And it's like, yeah, who knows how long his career would have been, what innovations, he either would have been the beneficiary of or inspired in the game. But it wasn't like he was perfect his first couple of years in the league because he was a young player, and of course he wasn't. And so I just think it's hard for me to take what Sean's career actually was and say it was better than what Trent did, even if it's very possible that had he, not tragically been taken from us, that he would have gotten to that. And that's like, there's no joy in saying that. Obviously, there's no like, I proved my point. That's just where I sit. But because of the extreme greatness that he had, I am at least open to saying, I'll hear the argument, and I will definitely say I think he should have been on that list of the top 5. Obviously, Chris Sims in his list, he had him just off, but I would certainly consider. Portis is an interesting one. That's a name that we didn't talk about a lot. I just don't think the longevity-wise. Like, CP was good for a long time, but when you're talking about the guys that we're talking about, we're talking 7, 8, 9 years. In Santana's case, 10 years of excellent production in Washington, and Portis just didn't quite have that much. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Your comments always welcome on YouTube at youtube.com/@the-team980 during the show. And of course, we post up clips after youtube.com/@Craig Hoffman, or for full episodes of Take Command, youtube.com/@1067 The Fan. Did I already say that? I don't know what I said. Whatever. Don't cut that for a promo. Congrats on listening to the first 5 seconds of radio that I'll do all day. We'll do better next. What do we got next, Anthony? We got
Otto Boldon.
Oh, that's right. Otto Boldon's joining us. That's a fun one. Otto Boldon, NBC track analyst. The U.S. Track and Field Championships are this weekend, and going to talk to Otto Boldon next. I'm pumped about this. How could I forget? Otto Boldon next, everybody.
DC has a new home for your favorite songs from the 80s.
Tom Petty.
Always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Streaming live on YouTube too, youtube.com/@theteam980. It's our pleasure to welcome to the show now Otto Boldon, who is the lead analyst for NBC Sports coverage of track and field, the Olympics, the U.S. Championships, the World Championships, U.S. Championships this past weekend. And Otto, pretty amazing weekend. So much to talk about. Thanks for coming on and appreciate your time.
Yeah, it was a fun weekend. Glad to be on with you.
So I figured the easiest way to organize this is let's just go up in distance. Let's start with the sprinters. Let's start at the 100 and bounce back and forth between the men and the ladies, because you really had tremendous races at all distances in the sprint distances. So on the women's side, Sha'Carri Richardson comes back to form, wins the 100 meters. What does it mean for her, and how is she setting up for World Championships after what has been a tremendously tumultuous, let's say, year, 18 months, going back to the U.S. Championships before the Olympics?
You know, for all the success that Sha'Carri has had and all the fast times that she's run since 2019, it was yet to make a team for the USA in the World Championships. And in fact, she has failed pretty spectacularly the last two times. The last time we had a Nationals, which was last year, to pick a U.S. team for the World Championship, we didn't get out of the first round, and that's the year where we had run 10.7 seconds earlier in the year. And then in 2019, when she had just turned pro, she made the final and didn't make the team. She was dead last. So a lot of people were looking to see, look, you know, Sha'Carri has talked about kind of finding herself again and you know, eliminating distractions and so on. But it seemed like for the most part she was able to handle it, and that's why I think her results were better. Now, waiting for her, you know, who knows how to win, who's won world titles at 200 in the person of Sarika Jackson of Jamaica. But I think she's a pretty safe bet for a medal at Worlds. The question is, can she win the gold in her first try?
On a human level, there's a lot of this that I feel like it's fair to say happened to her. There, you know, the tragic loss of her mother, and then the positive drug test that follows, and the kind of human tragedy that there is around her missing the Olympic team as well. But that doesn't mean she couldn't learn from it, grow from it in any kind of way. For those of us that just watch her run and aren't around her and aren't around the sport, how has she matured over the last 2 years? And has she matured through this and learned through things, even if, you know, a lot of people, myself included, frankly, think she was treated unfairly kind of at that time?
I think that's sort of why people are so vested in her story. I'm just in looking back through some of the YouTube clips of the weekend. She moved the needle for our sport in a way that no other American athlete does. You know, other clips, you see, you know, maybe 500,000 views. When it's a Sha'Carri clip, the views are up in the 2.5 million, 3 million. So people, I think, root for her because they feel like this is somebody who life maybe dealt a tough hand when she was young, and look at what she's done with it. In terms of how she's dealt with her celebrity and other things that go along with being a famous athlete, I think I've seen some real growth in her in the last 12 months where, you know, she doesn't every fight now. She's still fighting a little bit with people online, but every fight isn't her fight. Every fight with the federation or with her critic is not something that she takes up and feels like she has to beat to the end. I see her now sort of choosing to walk away from a lot of things. So it's not a coincidence why, you know, she's literally coming off of a weekend where she didn't just set one personal best. She set two. She ran a personal best in the 100 and a personal best in the 200. But for me, she's going to get another test because the screws are going to tighten a lot more when she gets to the World Championship. It's one thing when it's the American media, but there are a lot of people from the rest of the world who are going to be expecting that she is going to be contending for gold. And then I think if anything, if she comes back from Worlds and she doesn't have a medal, I think a lot of her critics are going to have some more ammunition to kind of go after her. But I feel very confident in picking Sha'Carri Richardson to be on that podium at the World Championship.
Otto Boldon, NBC Sports, with us. U.S. Championships this past weekend, about 40 days till the World Championships in Budapest. On the men's side, Otto, perhaps the most interesting person in the men's 100 is Noah Lyles, the world record, or not world record holder, but American record holder in the 200, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. One of the fastest ever. So, and he goes down to the 100 in part because he doesn't have to run the 200. He's automatically in at Worlds based off being the world champion, and he runs 10 flat on Saturday, Sunday after he had COVID on Monday. How impressive is that from him, and what do you think he can do at Worlds with another 40 days to prepare?
Well, it makes him a little hard to assess because I came into championships thinking, okay, it's not out of the question that Noah can get this done, because I felt like the field with Trayvon Bromell, who made the team last year, not running well, he didn't make the team this year. And then Marvin Bracey Williams, who had made the team and also medaled like Bromell and getting silver last year. In fact, he was out lean for the gold. I felt like with those two not being at their best, this was Noah's best chance to make the team. He made the team, but he was not starting well. He looked like the guy who hadn't quite figured out his start before the middle of the season last year. So it's very hard for me to assess what I think his chances are at Worlds. What I saw, I know he had COVID, and that couldn't have been fun so close to Nationals. But with what I saw in Nationals this past weekend, it's going to be tough for him to medal in the 100 because there's so many guys that are going to get away from him because he doesn't accelerate well in the first 30. He's always going to be coming from behind. And when you have to face the entire world and the fastest man on the planet, it's tough to run down anybody from behind. So if Noah Lyles goes to Worlds and he has solved some of his issues that he's had over the past couple of years in really getting out well, as we say, then he'll be fine, and then he can contend for a medal. But the Noah that ran a national, if he's starting like that, it's going to be mid-pack for him in the final. So it's really just up to him and how he shows up to those World Championships. That's going to determine how he's, how his medal chances are in the 100. In the 200, he's a favorite until somebody beats him. And I can't pick anybody. I know Ariane Knighton looks very good, but I can't pick against Noah Lyles in a championship again based on him and how good he looked last year in setting that American record.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you think for Knighton, is it going to have or come down to him running the race of his life and Noah making some kind of mistake, or is there a peak form version of Ariane Knighton that can actually run with peak form Noah Lyles at these stages of their careers?
I think Noah's going to run 19.3, 19.4. I think peak Ariane Knighton this year will maybe top out at 19.5. So you see the problem there. But I think you said it accurately. If Noah has a bad night and Ariane has the night of his life, I think then we can start thinking about the possibility of us having a 19-year-old world champion, which of course would be unprecedented in that event. But I think right now that's actually a race that's easy for me to pick. It's Noah in first and it's Ariane in second, unless I see differently. Bednarik is usually a good pick for a medal. He's been second at the last two championships, Worlds and Olympics, and he could actually get into that silver medal position if Ariane does not have a good race in Budapest in the final.
Otto Boldon with us from NBC Sports, talking track and field as the World Championships are just about 40 days away, coming off the U.S. Championships over the weekend. We'll talk about Sydney McLoughlan-Levrone in a moment, but the women's 200, Otto, Gabby Thomas returns to form, one of the most accomplished runners of the last half decade, still young, still in her prime, but coming off injuries the past couple of years. She beats Richardson, and she really runs away with that race. Obviously, Shericka Jackson, who you've already mentioned from Jamaica, is looming, but can Gabby win gold at Worlds with her form right now?
I think she's going to have to find another 10th or two because Shericka Jackson ran 21.4 last year, and she wasn't running last year as fast in the 100. So she's gone back and gotten faster. She has the world lead right now at 10.65. That is her first time under 10.70. So what you're looking at this year is a Shericka Jackson who blew away the 200 200-meter field last year, but now she's faster at 100. Gabby just ran 2160 for a personal best. That's not going to trouble Sharika, I don't think. But if she gets under 21.5 or close to 21.5, that's a whole different story. So I think you have a very intriguing matchup and two women who finished extremely well in Gabby Thomas and Sharika Jackson of Jamaica. And that should be a really good matchup. I think that's the battle for gold. I don't think anybody else is really close. I haven't seen anybody else who I think is going to trouble them this year. So kind of like the men's 200, the first two spots I would bet a lot of my money are pretty much taken care of. And maybe the more intriguing question is who gets third, because I think there are a lot of people in the running for third, including Sha'Carri Richardson, somebody like Adina Asher-Smith, or somebody else maybe from Jamaica who wants to step up, maybe Shelly-Ann Fraser-Price, who made the team for the Jamaican 200 and who did get silver last year at the World Championship.
The biggest story, perhaps, is in the women's 400 Open. Sydney McLoughlan-Levrone runs away with it. She wins by over a second. She's one of the fastest in the world this year. How do you describe what she's doing? The best ever at the 400 hurdles. Only her fourth ever competitive 400 Open or something like that, and she's 0.05 of a second off of the American record. How do you try to put into perspective what she's doing?
It's almost with Sydney McLoughlan-Levrone. It's the combination of amazing talent, a little bit of fearlessness, and a coach who is willing to push his athletes into things that they are not even comfortable with initially. Because I know enough about her situation with Bobby Kersey, who, of course, has guided some of the most illustrious names in this sport to greatness. To know that sometimes he comes to his athletes, and he, of course, coaches a Thing Mo, the Olympic champion at 800 as well, and he will come to them and say, okay, here's my plan. And they go, what? What is that going to do? And he's like, you're not going to see it initially, but you'll eventually see it. And I know that he probably had some things that he told Sydney this year, and she went, what? But look at the results. As you said, she has only run 4 finals at 400 meters, and she's taken that personal best down from 49 high, and now she's knocking on the door of the American record and looking like the world record. If not this year, she's certainly going to be, challenging it next year. And that record has been there for ages. But it's really just a perfect storm of great talent, great coaching, and somebody who's not afraid to take chances, and it's paying off in the form of some really fast time. So,
last thing, do you think the American record falls? Obviously, your broadcast partner, Sonia Richards-Ross, has it. Do you think Sonia's record falls in Budapest of the American record, and do you think the world record falls?
I would push all my chips to the direction of Sonia losing her record to Sydney, because I think, listen, Sydney is one of the favorites for gold, but she's not a lock. Why? Because there's a young lady from the Dominican Republic called Marilady Paulino, who got the silver medal at the Olympics. She also got the silver medal at Worlds last year. So it's not a given that Sydney just walks into the final in Budapest and wins. She could win. She could also be second. I don't see a lot of people who are capable of keeping her out of the top 2 spots. But yes, I think, yes, the American record goes. I think, yes, Sydney contends for gold. The world record, that's a whole other second and change faster than she ran at Nationals. I think maybe, as I said, by next year, but not this year. 47.60. I know mathematically that's pretty close, but that is a lot faster. She would have to go out in about almost a second faster than she went out to the first 200, and then she would have to run about the same on the second half. That's a tough task for somebody who is still learning the event. And as we said, she's only run 4 of them. So I would say world record next year, but a chance to go this year at World.
Yeah, seeing what she did in the hurdles and how those times came down, it certainly seems like it's on the table for the future. The question seems to be when, not if. Otto, been such a fan of yours for so long. You do such a great job with the whole team at NBC. Thanks so much for coming on the show, and hopefully we'll talk to you down the line closer to the World Championships.
Much appreciated. Glad to hear it, and thanks for having me on.
Otto Boldon, everybody, with us here on the Hoffman Show. When we get back, close out the show. Real things, real people said, into real microphones. What are we doing here?
It gets me pumped for the ESPYs tonight.
The ESPYs?
Yes.
This ain't ESPYs music.
I know, but it's just more of.
Like, I'm pumped up right now, but it's for football.
It
It's
does
not for
give
the
me
ESPYs.
football. Yes, but I'm thinking there's going to be the best play is going to come from the NFL this year.
I mean, that's very possible. You know what you should have played?
What should I play, Craig?
Party Life by Jay-Z.
Ah!
He's got a great SB lyric in there.
Next time.
I sport fly. I should win an SB or win the SB.
I'll do that next year. Or
saying.
tomorrow.
There you go. There you go. It's Hoffman Show, Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Our thanks to Otto Boldon, NBC Sports, and Don Van Natta of ESPN for coming on the show today. Just really excellent stuff from both of them on two very different fronts. Very, very appreciative of both of their time. They gave a lot of it during a busy time for both. Hopefully we'll get Otto back around the World Championships. Obviously, we'll be busy, training camp and everything, but World Championships are a pretty big deal. So if we can get Otto Boldon for the World Championships, I think we'll probably make room on the show because he's the best track analyst on the planet. All right. I think it's time to wrap up the show. It's time for Real Things Real People Said into real microphones.
Real things.
We're not gonna be sucked this year.
Real people.
5 and 11, not very good.
Said into real microphones.
You know, the culture is actually damn good.
Yeah, I got it. Just you did a weird thing. Again, every day, if you're not watching the stream as we prepare for Real Things, you miss top secret communication between Anthony and I. That's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to say. YouTube.com/@theteam980. Okay. We got some good stuff today. Tonight, Gold Cup final for the U.S. and the lineup just came out. It's same group that's been progressing through this tournament. It's kind of a B-plus team for the U.S. Most of their top players, Christian Pulisic, by the way, who signed for the AC Milan today, not there. Weston McKennie, not there. Matt Turner, the number one goalkeeper, kind of the one main guy who's there. But incredible interview that Men in Blazers pulled up on their Instagram the other day. I actually don't know how old this is, but there's a rumor that Weston McKennie is going to move to Germany in the Bundesliga this year. And already Union Berlin has Brendan Aronson, fellow Team USA member, and both played last year with Leeds. And they had a week off and were going to play golf, and I'll let Brendan Aronson, Roger Bennett, and Weston McKennie pick it up from there.
Was there ever a time that you've seen Weston lost for words?
Okay, I got a good one. This is just happened. You know it. There's a thing going on at the club right now where I'm getting backlash because I had my friends come out from America. I wanted to just go golfing with my friends, you know.
It happens to be we show up at the same time. His friends tee off in front of me, bro. I'm in the buggy by myself, playing by myself, instead of saying, and it's only 3 of them, instead of saying, hey, Wes, come make it 4 with us. He let me golf by myself.
I made it clear, bro. I made it clear.
Nah, Brendan, that's poor performance,
yeah,
man.
That's poor.
Thank you. Terrible. How you leave your guy hanging like that? If it's a random person and you're just like, hey, we're trying to play together, still, most golf courses won't even let you do that. I've wanted to play by myself, and they're like, no, go get in the cart with Johnny. And I'm like, I don't know Johnny. I want to play with Johnny or Ted or Baker. But they make you. Hate that. Hate that for Weston McKennie. Shouldn't be that way. The difference between the French League and the NBA Summer League. That was the question for Victor Wembanyama.
What is the difference have you noticed so far? Obviously, this is Summer League. It's not the real NBA season, but what have you noticed is the difference between the league you were playing in and the style of play here?
First of all, the court is more open. It's going fast, but it's less physical, and I get fouled a lot, but not as much. Yeah. Nothing to compare. And yes, and people are players are just flying, you know. Out there it's more underground, pushing underground, big box house. Here it's great athletes, the best in the world, way more talent. And but I like this better, you know.
I think Victor's going to have a great year this year because, people are worried about the physicality. News alert. News flash. People in the league know this. If you know, you know. Some people are probably going to get super mad when I say this, but the NBA compared to Europe is not physical. The idea that, all these European players came over and they were soft, no. Europe is way more physical, more skilled here. All right. We'll see you tomorrow on The Hoffman Show.